All right. Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so the task for today is to quickly complete our lecture on substance dualism, and then we're going to move on to behaviorism. Before we begin, does anyone have any questions about the material that we covered last time? If not, it's no problem. We can go ahead and get started. And if anyone has any questions as we proceed, then well, we can just take care of those as we go. I believe we left off right around here, where I began to talk about the difference between substance dualism and property dualism. So, one of the things I mentioned last time is the fact that most dualists today, if you are a dualist, chances are you are a property dualist rather than a substance dualist. The substance dualists that do exist um, usually invoke divine answers to the problems raised by substance dualism. The main um, issue with substance dualism, which we saw last time, is the introduction of the mind body problem. I suppose this has always been a problem, but we saw in the discourse between Rene Descartes and Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia that Descartes leaves something pretty important unexplained, and that is just exactly how an immaterial substance, like the mind, is supposed to interact with a material substance like the body. Princess Elizabeth, of course, replied to Descartes along the lines of saying that it would be easier for me to accept the mind as something physical than to accept a non-physical mind interacting with a physical body. She didn't use those exact words, but um, that's an articulation of the mind-body problem. And as mentioned, there are other answers to this that we didn't get a chance to cover. So Thomas Hobbes was even more of a materialist than Descartes, and he would have said that it was all mechanisms. Even the mind is mechanistic. Um, Hobbes actually likens cognition to um, reckoning. That is, reckoning numbers, doing mathematics is what he meant. And when we think, we're doing the exact same thing. We're just doing it with words and concepts, not numbers. Um, of course, there's Spinoza, um, who believed that there aren't two substances. There's just one substance, and that substance is God or nature, either one. Because Spinoza is kind of a pantheist or maybe a panentheist. So there's really only one substance, and that substance can have different attributes. One is extension, and another is thought. And then there are finite modes of that substance. Like I'm a finite mode of God or nature with the attribute of extension for my body and thought for my mind. So there's no interaction problem because it's all one substance. Leibniz does something different, but very similar when he argues that we everything is made of monads and there's no actual interaction happening. It just appears so because everything is pre-established. It's what Leibniz called a pre-established harmony. So there's no actual causality at all. It's just all the monads doing everything they are determined to do by God in this sort of pre-established harmony, right? Kim writes of those who have set aside dualism, like probably a lot of us. He says that if you have set aside substance dualism, at least for now, you can take having a mind simply as having certain special set of properties, capacities, and characteristics, something that humans and some higher animals possess, but sticks and stones do not. To say that something has a mind is to classify it as a certain sort of thing, as a thing with capacities for certain characteristic sorts of behavior and functions, such as sensation, perception, memory, learning, consciousness, and goal-directed action. For this reason, it is less misleading to speak of having mentality than having a mind. That last point is, I think, especially important. Remember, we kicked off our discussion on dualism by um, noting that the ancients, all the way back to Plato, equated having a mind with having a soul. But it's not quite correct to say that you have a soul. It's probably more accurate to say that you are your soul, essentially what you are. If you're a Platonist, you are your soul. Same with Descartes. Descartes identifies himself with his mind or soul, not with his body. Um, the me that's speaking to you now, sure, I have a body, but what Kim is saying is perhaps is that it's less misleading to think of myself as a mind rather than having a mind. So the being that is me, I have mentality. I have these capacities like perception, thought, consciousness, goal directed action, and so forth. But I don't have a mind uh, so much as I have mentality. If we're talking about me, myself, rather, I am a mind. You could think of it like that, right? So, maybe you want to be a property dualist, but you don't have to. You could be a reductive physicalist or a type physicalist, right? And we'll talk more about those later in the course. Um, some of you may sympathize with, for example, the eliminative materialism of Patricia and Paul Churchland. They claim that mentalistic terms like belief, desire, and so forth will one day go the way of, phlogiston or elan vital or the luminiferous ether, one of these concepts that we don't really employ anymore because it doesn't describe anything real. What is a monad? Good question. So a monad it's kind of hard to explain, but a monad is a little bit of substance. So my mind is a monad. Um, your mind is a monad. Um, but monads don't causally interact with one another. There's a pre-established harmony, like a causal explanation. Say if I use this pen right here that I have, taking the cap off. It now normally, if you're used to thinking of causal chains like most other philosophers, you would say that I caused the cap to be removed and put back on. But Leibniz would say, no, it's all monads, and they're all just determined to act this way by God, who establishes this harmony of interaction between all of the monads. So I didn't uncap and then recap the pen. All these parts, the cap, the rest of the pen, my hand, my mind, are just pre-established to work this way, such that there isn't really any interaction with anything. But yeah, monads are a bit tricky to explain. I think of them as like little bits of substance. Um, but we don't have to go super into Spinoza or Leibniz because they are a bit more kind of abstract than Descartes. I would say, I would say that Spinoza himself is very committed to the idea of God, definitely. Um, but Leibniz and Spinoza do different things with God. For Leibniz, God creates the universe and kind of orders everything to happen the way it will happen. It's almost like Laplace's demon, if you're familiar with that. It's a god who creates everything, establishes how everything is going to work, and then just kind of leaves it alone. But for Spinoza, God is like God just is the universe. God is everything, right? Um, so they both emphasize God quite a lot, but in different ways. Indeed, in different ways from the ways that Descartes did as well. But yeah, maybe you want to be a reductive physicalist or an eliminativist. Maybe you want to be a type physicalist, where types of mental states are just types of brain states. Or you can be a property dualism, right? Kim says of property dualism that dualism is no longer a dualism of two sorts of substances. It is now a dualism of two sorts of properties, mental and physical. Property is used here in a broad sense, Mental properties comprise mental functions, capacities, events, states, and the like. And similarly for physical properties. Now, if you're a reductive physicalist, you're going to just say that we can reduce those mental properties down to physical properties. We can reduce mental states to brain states. And nothing is lost if we describe things in terms of brain states instead of mental states. But property dualism says, well, no, we can't really do that. There's still two different types of properties. But each of these have in common that they do not think the mind is made of an immaterial substance. So if you're a property dualism, I mean, think back to the introductory chapter when we talked about supervenience. A lot of property dualists would endorse a supervenience view, where wherever you have physical property P and there is mental property M, then wherever else you find physical property P, you will also find M. So that's what a property dualist would say. A property dualist is going to say, they're going to endorse one form of the supervenience theory or another, more than likely. So that's about it for chapter 2. Does anyone have any questions about property dualism or anything else that I've mentioned in passing, like maybe more Spinoza or Leibniz or something? So reductive or reduction, when we're so a property is something that, as Kim says, inheres to a substance. And there's different ways we can think about a substance, but properties inhere to things. Let's forget about substances and talk about things, right? So I have here my trusty old cup of coffee. Now, the coffee has several properties. It is bitter. It has some milk in it. It's warm. It contains caffeine, right? These are all properties. These properties can't really stand on their own. Properties need a being to adhere to. So, I can have a red ball. The ball has the property of being red, but redness is a property because redness doesn't occur by itself. It needs an object. Another way to think about properties is that they are predicable, which means that in a linguistic utterance, I can predicate properties to objects. So I can say the red ball. Well, the ball is the object, and red is a property that the ball has, and I predicate that property when I make a statement like that. The ball is spherical, it is red, it is flying through the air at 20 kilometers an hour. These are all properties that the ball has. Reductionism, we are talking about uh, reducing one thing to another. So take again the color red. I can say, okay, what is the color red? Well, the color red is a certain wavelength of electromagnetic radiation, visible light of a certain wavelength. So I can reduce redness, if I want, to a physical description of the properties of light. That's reduction. And the idea is, if you're a reductionist, you think that this can be done without losing any information. So if you're a reductionist about the mental, and you say, well, like, Josh's belief that Ottawa is the capital of Canada is reducible to Josh's brain state that realizes that belief, well, then you can just talk about the brain state without losing any information. So saying the idea is that the statement, Josh has mental state R, and Josh has brain state R. The idea is, if you're a reductionist, is those things say the same thing. And because the mental description is higher, more abstract than the physical description, you could get rid of the mental description and still know everything. That's what reductionism means in this context. Does that answer your question? Okay, excellent. We're going to actually, it's a good question because we're going to have some occasion to talk about reductionism today when we talk about logical behaviorism. And so some of our examples of translating mentalistic talk to behavior talk is an example of reduction. But let's talk about behavior and behaviorism in psychology and philosophy. And speaking of psychology and philosophy, this is William James. He was an American philosopher and psychologist, one of the founders of psychology as we know it. And he wrote um, that I believe this is in Principles of Psychology, that psychology is the science of mental life, both of its phenomena and of their conditions. The phenomena are such things as we call feelings, desires, cognitions, reasonings, decisions, and the like. And James, incidentally, thought that introspection, looking inside one's own mind, as it were, is a very important tool for the psychologist. And James wasn't the only one to think this way. I mean, just a short time later, the phenomenologists enter the scene, right? And they also use a kind of introspection, a sort of radical empiricism about the contents of one's own conscious experience to study the mind. Freud um, doesn't talk so much about introspection as he does psychoanalysis, but pays a lot of attention to what's going on within the mind of somebody. That changed with behaviorism. And this is J.B. Watson, who's considered the founder of behaviorism. And he says of psychology that it is a purely objective experimental branch of natural science. Its theoretical goal is the prediction and control of behavior. Behaviorists, especially the psychological behaviorists, but also the logical behaviorists, did not pay any attention or didn't think we ought to pay any attention to mental states because they're not observable. This all gets to a principle called, this will take us to a principle called intersubjective verifiability. Um, and mental states lack this. We can't intersubjectively verify mental states because they're unobservable. Behaviorism treats the mind, if you will, as a black box. A black box is like a box that we can't see inside of, so we don't know what's in it. So let's not observe or try to observe what's in the box because we can't. Instead, we must observe behavior. So behaviorism treats psychology as the science of behavior and not the science of the mind. And it was the dominant movement within psychology until something called the cognitive revolution happened. And there were lots of reasons why the cognitive revolution happened. One is that behaviorists themselves, like Edward Tolman, were getting experiments that seemed to indicate that animals like rats and pigeons were using mental models to navigate mazes, which behaviorism couldn't account for, but because behaviorism treats the mind as a black box. So behaviorists themselves were starting to seek mentalistic answers to the behaviors they were observing. Another reason was Noam Chomsky, who wrote a scathing review of B.F. Skinner's book. B.F. Skinner was a behaviorist, and Chomsky writes an absolutely scathing review of his book, Verbal Behavior, where he shows that, look, there's just not enough time. If all learning is the product of conditioning, as behaviorists say, then there's not enough time. This does not explain how children acquire language as fast as they do, because they pick it up real fast, and they seem to have a universal grammar, an innate understanding of the rules of language. Behaviorism can't explain this. There were the mental imagery studies that happened into the 60s and 70s. Lots of reasons why behaviorism kind of went the way of the dinosaur, but it casts a long shadow. We still think of psychology as behavioral science. Like, have you guys ever seen any of those police procedural shows like Criminal Minds, or I think Mindhunter is a good example. You know, who's seen shows like this? Maybe not. Okay, maybe no one's seen well, you should. Well, I like Mindhunter was really good. Oh, Taylor likes Criminal Minds. Good. Yeah. Criminal Minds. Yeah, Criminal Minds is a good one. I used to watch that back in the day. I like that Dr. Spencer Reed there. He's an interesting fella. And Mindhunter was cool because Mindhunter kind of looks at how behavioral science with like forensic behavioral science got going in the FBI back in the what was it, the 50s and 60s or something like that. And you can see when you see these sort of police procedurals that you know, they're using psychology, but they talk about it in terms of behavioral science. Like I think that's the unit in Criminal Minds, right? Isn't it? It's the behavioral science unit or something, right? I don't quite remember. Maybe somebody who's watched more Criminal Minds can confirm that for me. But they call these things like yeah, behavioral analysis unit. That's the one. Thank you, Cass. Yeah. Yeah. So that's this. That's the legacy of behaviorism in psychology. Um it's so ingrained that it's even on our police procedurals. But you know, there are also philosophical forms of behaviorism, and we'll talk about those. So I mentioned that William James emphasized the importance of introspection. Um, yeah, it is fascinating, you know. And I'm not going to say that. Well, here's spoiler alert: where we're going to end up today is that you know behaviorism doesn't work as a science of the mental, but that does not mean we should discount the importance of behavior for understanding the mental, right? So that's not to get ahead of myself, but that is kind of where we're going to end up at the end of this chapter, right? Yeah. And yeah, like behaviorists kind of took it too far. Like, what do you mean the mind is a black? What do you mean mental states aren't observable? They're obviously a thing, right? You cannot, and this is especially true with philosophical behaviorism. You just cannot make sense of behavior without positing mental states. It just doesn't work. So anyway, um, on to another little quote from James, again from Principles of Psychology, who emphasized the importance of introspection. The pursuance of future ends and the choice of means for their attainment are thus the mark and criterion of the presence of mentality in a phenomenon. Um, this is the importance of behavior, right? The ability, like when you observe that an agent can uh, decide to pursue an end and choose the means by which to bring about that end, they're engaging in instrumental reasoning. That's a type of behavior. And James says that we all use this test to discriminate between an intelligent and a mechanical performance. We impute no mentality to sticks and stones because they never seem to move for the sake of anything. So behavior may be a mark of the mental, in fact, even according to James. Like things with minds behave in purposive ways. That is what James is saying here. I believe in this same work, James uses the example of the automatic sweetheart, which is kind of a fun thought experiment. He has you imagine an automatic sweetheart, a robot girlfriend, right? An automaton who just mechanically, you know, behaves in certain ways. Like, you know, when you come home, she mechanically says, "Hello, dear," you know, mechanically offers you flowers and just does it because she's a clockwork mechanism and is not acting for reasons. Would you feel loved by this automatic sweetheart? No, of course you wouldn't, says James, because it's just a machine. Although with the advent of robots and AI, I mean, who knows, right? We might enter the age of automatic sweethearts. It might be like that movie Her, right? If anyone's seen that. I actually haven't seen it, but I know the plot. You know, in Her, dude has an automatic sweetheart on his cell phone and he falls madly in love with it. So I don't know. But James's point, I think, is that, you know, we regard things with minds quite differently than we do things without minds. And one of the ways we recognize a thing that has a mind versus a thing that doesn't is this sort of intentional, purposive behavior, agentive behavior. That means acting on the basis of reasons, right? So behavior is important, even for somebody like James, who emphasizes introspection very heavily. So, one question that concerns us today is the question of the relationship between mind and behavior. For behaviorist psychologists, they say that behaviors are really the only data that matter. They're the only thing that we can observe. So, we operationalize mentality as behavior. We don't even bother to look for mental states because we can't see them, we can't observe them. So, we just focus on behavior. The philosophical behaviorists say that behavior is constitutive of mentality, and they're the reductionists in this picture. They're the ones who say, look, you could have a description like a mentalistic description, and you could have a behavior description. The mentalistic description is more abstract. It's a higher level description than the behavioral description. But we can translate the mentalistic description into a behavioral description and not lose any information at all. So we'll just get rid of the mentalistic descriptions. We'll see if it works. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. What's the problem? Where does the problem with behaviorism come from? Well, to find out, we've got to talk about the theater metaphor or the Cartesian theater. Oh, Taylor, you mean behaviors are the only observable data that matter? Is that what you mean? Yeah, okay. I guess if you're a psychologist, maybe, but well, it's unfortunate that we won't have chance to really get into this, but during the cognitive revolution, one of the things that really um brought mentalistic talk back into fashion was were these mental rotation studies that psychologists were doing, like, Shepard and Metzler and those thinkers. And they were having people do these same different tasks where they had to like rotate an image in their mind, and their results can really only be explained by appeal to mental imagery. But yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, well, that's like nonverbal behavior versus verbal behavior, which, yeah, again, I'm not going to say that that's not important for understanding the mental. It's both of those types of behavior certainly are, right? Yeah, that's true. Like, you can tell if somebody is genuinely smiling at you versus doing the false smile. If you look at certain nonverbal cues, somebody might say they're happy to see you and smile at you, but you really smile with your eyes, not your mouth. I always use Tyra Banks as the example here. Her smizing thing that she does, um, with the smiling with the eyes. That's actually indicative of a genuine smile because a lot of emotional information is conveyed in the upper part of the face. But somebody like I don't know, a psychopath, who's just trying to manipulate you or something, when they smile and they're faking it, their eyes don't do that smizing thing. Only the mouth smiles. Um, I don't know. Probably not absolutely foolproof because there are some pretty good actors out there, right? Um, and there are ways to beat, very simple ways to beat things like polygraph tests, for example. Um, so I don't know, but there are. I mean, you will find inconsistencies if you talk to a liar long enough. You're going to find enough inconsistencies to identify that they're lying just by virtue of verbal behavior. But yeah, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know too much more about that. Um, so what's the problem? Okay. One way that we conceive of the mind, and this is kind of like dualism. This way of thinking about the mind is very ingrained, I would say. It's natural to think of the mind this way. Is to think of the mind as a sort of mental theater. And here's a theater. This is actually an interior shot of the Royal Albert Hall in London. But imagine that it's a mental theater. And all these mental events, perceptions, thoughts, emotions, they're happening on the stage here. And you are the sole audience member. And that's come to be known as the Cartesian theater. Daniel Dennett called it the Cartesian theater. Although Descartes doesn't explicitly articulate this view, and you do find other philosophers like Julien Offray de la Mettrie, who was a French physician and kind of like the anti-Descartes. He uses the theater metaphor. But that's the idea, is that your mental life occurs on a stage or screen. All of your thoughts, feelings, emotions, perceptions, everything mental happens on a stage or screen, and you are the audience. What do you all make of this? And can you identify problems with it? Like, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think this is a natural way to think of the mind? Does this sort of make sense to you, or do you think, oh, maybe this doesn't make sense to me? Oh, Jack, and then Taylor, and then Venance. Go ahead, Jack first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty intuitive way. Yeah, just as someone just said in the chat, of thinking about the mind. But one of the aspects it doesn't really capture is all those things happening like behind the curtains, I guess, so to speak.
Yes,
Um,
yeah,
we
and
talked
and
about
and
this
and
last class, but
yeah.
yeah,
Well, some like Bernard Bars would say what happens behind the scene, that's your unconscious. Um, so Bars uses a sort of theater metaphor in his global workspace theory of consciousness, but yeah, that's a good point. Um, yeah, that's another good one. Yeah, the it seems odd that the audience has a say in what's going on. Yeah, the qualia is included in this, exactly, Natalia. So all like conscious experiences which have qualia, like they're qualia laden, they're qualitative, there's something that it's like. Those would be part of the things that happen on the stage or the screen. Yeah. Yeah, no, a good point. Taylor, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that like this is a very neat way of putting it. I don't think that people naturally are maybe as perceptive to what's going on in their mind. And so this kind of places it as like, you're the audience member and it's very clear to you, like right in front of your face, what's happening. Whereas emotions, perceptions, thoughts, they're not as neat, I think, and they're not as um like linear. So I think that if this were to work, the stage on stage, what you would see as the only audience member would be like a circus. You would see like two kids in the background fighting. You would see somebody crying in the corner. Like you would see all these other things, that like is realistically what's going through your mind, right? Because I'm pretty sure we experience like what, a million thoughts a day. So if you were to actually put that, like translate that onto a screen, I think that that would be incredibly chaotic. And this also assumes that the you that they're speaking about is self-aware. And a lot of people walk around being really self-unaware about what's going on in their mind, what they're feeling.
That's
So like
true.
yeah, I think it's just too neat. But
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah, very good. I agree. And there are other problems like Jack mentions here. Reductio, we can give it the old reductio ad absurdum treatment and ask, well, so if you're the audience member, and you're seeing everything on the stage, well, how does that work? Is there another audience member in your head watching things on a screen? Well, then it's called the homunculus problem, actually. A little person, a homunculus, a little human in your head. Is it little humans all the way down? Right? Well, that's absurd. Yeah, no, but you're right, Jack. It is kind of giving it that reductio ad absurdum thing. Venance, go ahead.
From my perspective, I just said if you're described as the audience, it takes away the sense of agency in your own world.
That's a good point. Yeah. And I would say that that's why I often use, instead of the Cartesian theater example, I use the giant robot example. So again, for those anime fans in the audience, imagine that you are not the audience member in the theater, but you are the pilot of the giant robot. And that way you have some agency because you can control the robot. It's like your mind is the pilot and your body is the robot. But we still have the same problem. How does the pilot of the robot work? Does he have a little robot pilot in his brain, all the way down? It's the homunculus problem all over again. So there are problems with the Cartesian theater. Yeah, like Iron Man or, Gundam, Neon Genesis Evangelion, any one of those, right? Like, it's like how, if I'm like that, if my body is the robot and my mind is the pilot, well, but then how does the mind work? We get the homunculus problem either way we look at it. But another problem is that if the mind were to work this way, then we couldn't know other minds at all, because we're just stuck within our own minds. Well, Jarvis, I guess, is supposed to be an AI, right? But I don't know. Or then he becomes Ultron, and then I don't know. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Like I find the Marvel stuff very hit and miss. Some of it I really like, some of it I don't, and I don't know that much about Jarvis. Just that he's a snarky kind of AI who lives in the suit. Um, or maybe he doesn't. I don't know. Uh, but yeah, like if your mind is Tony Stark and your body is the suit, well then how does Tony Stark work? Is he just another guy in another robot suit and it's robot suits all the way down? Well, that's the homunculus problem. So, but if the mind works like the Cartesian theater, another problem is that we cannot know other minds. We can only really know about our own minds. And this leads to a problem that's called solipsism, which is the belief that, well, it basically comes from the Latin that means it means the self alone, and it's the idea that only you exist. So I can be certain about me and my experiences and the fact that I exist, but everybody else could just be, a figment of my imagination. So solipsism is bad. We want to avoid solipsism. And one person who was concerned with this was this guy, Ludwig Wittgenstein. So we'll get to what he says about this in a moment. But think, for example, if your roommate, you infer that what can you infer from this case? Your roommate is listening to a weather report. Then she grabs her umbrella before she leaves the house. What can you infer from that? Like, you hear your roommate listening to the weather, and then when she goes outside, she brings her umbrella. Yeah, well, not just that it's raining, but she believes it's going to rain, right? Yeah, she thinks it's going to rain. How about if you hear a loud crash, and then your roommate cries out in pain? What then? What can you infer from that? Yeah, she hurt herself. She's in pain, right? She's in pain. Now, is there a difference between these kinds of states? The beliefs, the state of belief and the state of being in pain? Maybe. Let's take a look. We've got to talk about the beetle in the box. This is from the Philosophical Investigations by Wittgenstein. Here's what he says. Suppose everyone had a box with something in it. We call it a beetle. No one can look into anyone else's box, and everyone says he knows what a beetle is only by looking at his beetle. Here it would be quite possible for everyone to have something different in his box. So, what do you think Wittgenstein's trying to say here? And think to the pain example. Think back to the pain example, right? Like I have a pain, you have a pain. We all know what pain feels like, right? We all know what pain is, right? Well, yeah, I agree. We can't really formalize pain, but yeah, is pain different for everybody? Yeah, are we talking absent or inverse qualia? Yeah, might it be different? Like my pain different than yours? How would we know? The pain here is the beetle in the box, right? And I might have something like I'm calling it a beetle, but what do I have in my box? I don't know. Maybe it's rhinoceros beetle, right? And we're both talking about our beetles, and we both think we know what beetles are because we can only look at our own beetles. But you have a different beetle in your box. Maybe you have a Volkswagen Bug or John Lennon. That's your beetle. But my beetle is different than yours. It could be possible that we all have different beetles in our boxes. The same thing with pain, right? How do I know if we're talking about beetles in boxes or uh, or um, or Cartesian theaters? I can't know what's in your box or what's going on in your theater. And this is kind of like the epistemic problem of solipsism, like the problem of knowing other minds. This is the problem of knowing other minds. Yeah, Jack, this is the inverted spectrum. Yeah, same thing. Like if our spectrums, our visual spectrums were flipped and your red is my green, well, we could both talk about red and green sensibly, even though we have different inner experiences of those colors. But we would never know that because, even though what looks like red to me is green to you, you still use the word red for it. So we both point and say, that's red. To me, it's red. To you, it's my green. But to you, it's your red. It's crazy. Is it fair to measure pain if everyone has a different pain tolerance? Well, yeah. I mean, this is another consideration, right? Some people are maybe like not as sensitive to pain as others. Maybe some people have congenital analgesia, so they actually don't process pain signals. No, no, because those are different. Those are quite different. Like, well, I mean, not, I'm not really sure how that would apply that way. Um, but like Jill says, yeah, like the picture of the dress. Um, does anyone know the dress? It went viral. Geez, probably about a decade ago now. Yeah. So some of you know, but I think maybe I should bring up an image of the dress. Um, I think I have one on my computer actually. Let's go to pictures. I got the dress here somewhere. These are my philosophy pictures. Ah, there it is. So I'm sharing my screen, so you should all be able to see this picture. So everybody look at this picture, and what color is it? Tell me what color it is. I see it as white and gold. So blue and black, gold and white. Okay. Blue and black. Interesting. That's pretty cool, huh? So here we're seeing it differently. Some of us are seeing it as gold and white, and some see black and blue. Yeah, so as far as I understand what happened is the guy who took the picture and caused it to go viral had like strangled his wife or something, or yeah, it was some kind of, it was weird. That news just came out recently, actually, quite disturbing. Taylor, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just stood up to like grab my coffee on the other table. And as I moved to the side of my laptop, it turned white from white and gold to blue and black when I'm viewing the side of my screen. So I think that, like, depending on where you are looking at your screen, if you have a second screen, that might be why you're viewing it another color. But I just discovered this because I remember when it went viral in 2016.
Yeah, it can flip. A similar thing is the Yanni Laurel thing. You guys remember that? This one was an audio example, and some people heard Yanni and some heard Laurel. But if you messed with the pitch, you could make it Yanni or Laurel like more regularly. So these problems, like the dress, Yanni versus Laurel, different things like that, show us this kind of beetle in the box problem, right? Like, well, you know, there are some times when we can identify that we do probably not have the same beetles in our boxes. But most of the time, we're not aware of the differences, right? So this is the problem of knowing other minds, and it's related to this idea of solipsism. We're not going to get super into Wittgenstein today, but one of the ways that he deals with this is by understanding language as a sort of game that we all play with one another. And it's our use of the words in the language game, uh, this sort of common game that we all play together, that grounds the meaning of those words and makes it reasonable to assume that, you know, when I say, you know, the ball over there, that you understand what I have in mind, right? Because we're playing the same language game. But here's the key, right? Behavior is publicly observable. The beetle in the box, what's on the screen or stage in the Cartesian theater, the private inner life of you and I is not publicly observable like our behavior is. Behavior is also agentive, right? When we say behavior, we're talking about purposeful behavior, right? If I decide I'm going to put my hand up and I raise my hand, that is behavior. But if you just grab my arm and raise it, that's not my behavior. That's your behavior because you grab my arm and raise it. You're behaving, but my arm going up is not behavior in that case because it's not agentive. Also, like, you know, consider moving your knee. You can move your knee of your own volition. That's behavior. But if a doctor strikes your patellar tendon with one of those little reflex hammers and your knee just, you know, your leg just moves, that's not behavior. That's just a mechanical action. Behavior doesn't necessarily have to be doesn't have to be intentional. You know, I might decide to walk over there and I trip on something and I fall down and go, ah, that's, you know, not intentional, but it's behavior. It's agentive. You know, so that's a good question, Michael. And some people would say yes. Some people would categorize that as behavior. I'm not sure that I would because I'm not sure that the plants have mental states. These are very mechanical processes. Plants, if you think about it, plants are kind of like reflex agents, or maybe what you could call zero order systems, like a thermostat. You know, there's just very mechanical processes that govern their behavior. And sure, we can talk about it as behavior, but I don't think it's the same as behavior that occurs um, owing to, you know, the presence of a mind and mental states. But some people would disagree with me. Some people would say, no, clearly there is plant behavior, right? Like sunflowers, you know, It's called heliotropism, as you say. They open up in the morning, they follow the sun across the sky, and close up at night. That's heliotropism, following the sun. The Venus flytrap was another example we talked about, where it needs 2 taps on the hairs in its flowers within 20 seconds, or it won't close. It's so that it saves energy. Well, it depends who you talk to, right? Behaviorists are going to say, yeah, no, we should only talk about behavior. Who cares about the mind? Maybe there are like plant cognition people who might talk about plant behavior. It really depends on what you mean. What I mean by behavior is something that is agentive and purposeful and publicly observable. I would say that in the case of plants, their behavior is publicly observable, but it's not agentive. So let's qualify this by saying agentive behavior, and that allows for the possibility of plant behavior, right? Speaking of behavior, there are these very angry house sparrows at my bird feeder. Their behavior is quite interesting. They're fighting over some of the bird food in my bird feeder. How complicated are house sparrows? Are they reflex agents, or do they have mental states? Good question. But I think that animals do exhibit purposive agentive behavior. It just incidentally. I'm not sure about plants though. So here are some kinds of behaviors that Kim outlines on 66 and 67. One kind of behavior would be like physiological reactions. So you're perspiring, you're salivating, coughing, your heart rate goes up or down, blood pressure goes up or down. Those are one type of behavior. Who can observe behavior? The plants or the birds or people? Oh yeah, the animals, yeah. Especially some higher animals. Some birds like corvids, and then like mammals like great apes, cetaceans, elephants. They can definitely observe behavior, and they certainly are behavior readers, yes. So here are some behaviors. We have the physiological stuff. We have bodily movements. So walking, running, raising your hand, going over and opening a door or a window, throwing a ball to somebody. My cat scratching at the door. Well, he doesn't scratch at the door. But the cats know how to get their cat food, right? They'll sit there and stare at me and meow at me, and this will cause me to feed them, right? So my cats are actually quite good behavior readers. Rats running in a tea maze, right? Like the behaviorists observed. Behaviorists love doing studies, especially as I mentioned earlier, Edward Tolman. He trained rats to run through tea mazes, and he actually found that rats were able to make mental maps of these mazes. So those are all bodily movements. Actions involving bodily motions, like greeting a friend, writing an email, anything like that. And then actions not involving overt bodily movement. So mental actions like judging, reasoning, guessing, calculating, etc. So those are different kinds of behaviors. Yes, I believe that animals have minds. Descartes, we were just talking about Descartes. Descartes did not believe that animals had minds. At least not reason, right? But this view has really sort of fallen out of fashion, because there are so many examples of animal behavior that we just cannot explain without attributing mental states to them. And also, a lot of animals have quite sophisticated brains, the great apes, certain birds, certainly cetaceans, so whales and dolphins, have very, very complicated brains. So yeah, animals certainly do have minds. I think, however, that some animals have simpler minds than others. And some animals have minds that are radically different than our minds, like the octopus, which we'll talk about later today. We're gonna come back to the octopus. So when it comes to all of these behaviors, which ones are publicly observable? Which out of all these behaviors could a behaviorist deal with? Well, only 1 and 2. So motions and noises. So we've got our physiological reactions and our bodily movements. So that's 1 and 2, physiological reactions and bodily movements. These are the only ones that are publicly observable. I think you can see why, right? We don't have to discuss this for too long. You can see why they're publicly observable. Kim says that behavior in the sense of 1 and 2 doesn't enjoy the privileged access granted by the first person in the Cartesian theater, granted to the first person in the Cartesian theater. Equal access for all, he says, is of the essence of behavior as conceived by the behaviorist. So a behaviorist characterizes behavior in terms of what is publicly observable. And here what we've got are motions and noises, basically. Okay, is everybody following so far? Okay, good. Excellent. So behavior for a behaviorist is just what is publicly observable, because that is what is intersubjectively verifiable, which we'll get to here when we talk about logical behaviorism. Oh, excuse me. So Carl Hempel, who was a logical positivist working in the early 20th century, wrote that we see clearly that the meaning of a psychological statement consists solely in the function of abbreviating the description of certain modes of physical response characteristics of the bodies of men and animals. What does he mean? Well, first we've got to talk a little bit about logical positivism, which was an attempt to make philosophy kind of almost like a science. And what logical positivism does is it takes statements about the world, propositions, that are, and it takes them to be true if they can be verified. And that's called the verification principle of meaning. Here, what Hempel is doing is saying, like, since only certain behaviors are publicly observable, they're the only ones that we can formulate sentences about, which we can either verify or disverify. When it comes to human behavior, this is called logical behaviorism, because it emphasizes the logical connections between psychological expressions or mentalistic talk and behavioral expressions or behavior talk. Sometimes you might also see this called analytical behaviorism or philosophical behaviorism, and that's because logical positivism is part of the analytic tradition or the Anglo-American tradition. They kind of took it a little too far. We'll just say that. And one of the people who helped show that was actually Wittgenstein, who we met a little while ago. And by the way, scientists no longer use, neither do a lot of philosophers for that matter, but serious scientists don't verify. They attempt to falsify. And that idea is due to Karl Popper, who was a philosopher of science working around the same time as the logical positivists and the Vienna Circle and all those guys. So let's state Hempel's claim a little bit more formally following Kim. This is logical behaviorism 1. Any meaningful psychological statement, that is, a statement purportedly describing a mental phenomenon, can be translated without a loss of content into a cluster of statements solely about behavioral and physical phenomena. So any statement about psychology or the mental, like Josh believes that it is raining, can be transformed into a statement about just my behavior and my physical condition without losing any information. So Josh believes that it is raining can be reduced to Josh is taking his umbrella when he leaves the house. And there's no loss of content. We can make this claim a bit more broadly with logical behaviorism too. Every meaningful psychologically expression can be defined solely in terms of behavioral and physical expressions. That is, expressions referring to behavioral and physical phenomena. Pretty strong, right? What do we think so far? Well, maybe you'll have something to say about Hempel's reasoning. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, in this case, yeah, we can talk about physiological states, which would include brain states, but primarily we're talking about the noises and motions, like the observable physical behavior. Although, yeah, I think identity theorists and reductionists would agree with what you say here for sure. So, Hyla, go ahead.
Hi, Professor. I just have a quick question. So, what's the difference between physical expression and physical phenomena? Like especially for the second claim argument?
Yeah. Well, I guess an expression is just a type of phenomena. Like a phenomenon is just an appearance of something in the world. So when I'm talking about something physical happening in the world, it's just broadly speaking a physical phenomenon. Does that help? Okay. All right. So this is why Hempel is kind of approaching this the way he does. If you are a logical positivist, you think that the meaning of a sentence is fixed by the conditions that have to be verified to obtain if the sentence is true. These are the verification conditions, and this is the verification principle of meaning that I mentioned earlier. So, to take a very simple example, it is raining is a statement. It's a proposition. It's a statement about the world that could be true or false. How do I know if it's true? Well, I've got to verify that the conditions that would have to obtain for it to be true have obtained. So I've got to look out the window and see if it's actually raining. And if I see raindrops, well, the conditions that need the verification conditions that must obtain for it is raining to be true are obtaining. It is raining. I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. So those are verification conditions. Again, we don't really do this a whole lot anymore, but yeah, there for any sentence you can utter, there are conditions that have to obtain or occur for that sentence to be true. And if those conditions don't obtain, then the sentence is false. And that's the verification principle of meaning. And that's kind of how the logical positivists are operating when it comes to truth. So the second reason, if a sentence has a meaning that can be shared by different speakers, its verification conditions have to be accessible to each speaker, publicly observable. So take again, it is raining. The verification conditions for that sentence, that it is in fact raining, have to be publicly observable. And they are. I can look out the window and see whether it is raining or not, and so can you. So our verification conditions have to be publicly observable, accessible to each speaker. But here's the kicker. Number 3, only behavioral and physical phenomena, including physiological occurrences like an increase in heart rate or respiration or perspiration, only these are publicly observable. So that leads us to number 4. The shareable meaning of any psychological statement has to be specifiable by statements of publicly observable verification conditions. And those are statements describing behavioral and physical conditions that must hold if the psychological statement is true. So, if I am in pain, there must be publicly observable verification conditions, and these will be behavioral descriptions. Let's look at an example, right? Oh, well, we got an example coming up, but Kim writes on 69, if anyone insists that there are intersubjective criteria for psychological expressions as well, we should reply, the behaviorist would argue, that even if such existed, they, like Wittgenstein's beetles, could not be part of the meanings that can be understood and shared by different persons. Summarizing all this, we could say, insofar as psychological expressions have interpersonal meanings, they must be definable in terms of behavioral and physical expressions. So the data of our behaviorists must be objective, or as they would say, intersubjectively verifiable, because they're statements whose truth conditions depend upon publicly observable verification conditions. And mental states, as the beetle in the box idea shows us, are subjective, not objective. So they are not, at least it doesn't seem, intersubjectively verifiable. And again, this was a problem that Wittgenstein really wanted to deal with. Now, is it possible to translate the subjective into the objective in this way? Maybe. Let's say you have a toothache, or Paul. There's a guy, Paul, and he has a toothache. How does Hempel translate the sentence, Paul has a toothache, a type of pain, into statements which have intersubjectively verifiable verification conditions? Well, we could say Paul weeps and makes gestures of such and such kinds. Maybe he touches his jaw and goes, ouch, it hurts, right? Maybe you ask, what's the matter? And he says, I have a toothache, right? That would work. Maybe you look closer. Maybe you're the dentist and you look and you see a decayed tooth with the pulp exposed. Well, that would certainly hurt, one would say. Maybe Paul's blood pressure and digestive processes, his reaction speed, show certain changes that are indicative of being in pain. Maybe there are processes in Paul's central nervous system that we could observe with a brain scan that are indicative of pain. Now, which of these, Hempel wants to know, is translatable? Only A and B. Only A and B are translatable into behavioral statements about behavior and physical phenomena. But even B isn't quite translatable in the way that a behaviorist wants, because it concerns verbal behavior. So verbal behavior is a little special. Verbal behavior is different than physical behavior. And where we're going to end up here, or I should say different than mere physical behavior. Where we're going to end up is, like how verbal behavior is different. Well, verbal behavior could, I guess, be operationalized as mental, as a measure of mentality. This is incidentally, this is what Alan Turing does with the Turing test. When he asks, "Can machines think?" Well, I don't know, but you know what we can ask? We can ask if they can hold a conversation. And we all agree that anything that can hold a conversation must be able to think. So, can machines think? Who cares? Can they hold a conversation? That's the question. So B isn't really translatable because it's verbal behavior. Any questions so far? I'm thinking maybe we take a break soon. Maybe we break for 15 minutes and resume at 4. What does everyone think? Natalia, what is it that what do you mean that you're not quite clear on? So verbal behavior is different than mere physical behavior, and the reason why is because we kind of have to we can't translate verbal behavior into mere behavioral statements because of reasons we're going to get into, but ultimately what it boils down to is what's behind the verbal behavior, and that is a mind. So we can't translate verbal behavior into strictly speaking just behavioral phenomena in the way that the behaviorist wants. Yeah, so far, I mean, this is what something like John Searle would say. Machines are just programmed, they're deterministic. I mean, Turing wouldn't disagree with that. But Turing would say, if a machine can have a conversation, we have to grant that it's thinking. Searle would say, no, you wouldn't. And that's what his Chinese room thought experiment is about. But when we look at functionalism, we'll have a chance to talk about this a lot more. But also, yeah, Natalia, I hope that clears it up. It'll become clearer as we go. But hey, let's stop for now. We'll come back at 4 and we will resume. And we're making pretty good progress through today's slides. So I think we might finish on time. So I'll see you all in about 15 minutes. Okay. Okay, everybody, let's get started again. Shall reshare my screen? Okay, so we were talking about behavior and the difference between, what we could characterize as physical behavior, including physiological phenomena, and verbal behavior. So in considering that difference, let's talk about mentalistic terminology. One very important mentalistic term that you're going to hear a lot about in philosophy of mind is, of course, belief. Now, mental states, such as beliefs, but also desires, intentions, hopes, etc., are examples of what we call propositional attitudes. So you'll remember from our lecture on the introductory chapter that these are propositional attitudes, attitudes we adopt toward propositions. These are statements about the world that could be true or false. Propositional attitudes are often linguistically formatted with a that clause. So Josh believes that it is raining, or Sarah believes that Ottawa is the capital of Canada, right? These are propositional attitudes. And feel free to review chapter 1 if you want to go over this stuff a little bit more. So how could we define a belief in terms of behavior? Well, it's tricky. Kim asks how we could define a sentence like S believes that there are no native leopards in North America in terms of behavior. So S, for subject, believes that there aren't any leopards, at least not native ones, in North America. Sure, there are some leopards in zoos, but there's no native leopards. How do we translate that into a sentence about into a behavior sentence, a mental sentence into a behavior sentence? Pain is associated with pain behavior, and behaviorists can talk about pain and they can reduce a mentalistic state, mentalistic sentence like, or a psychological description we might want to call it, such as Josh is in pain, to Josh is wincing and groaning, right? No problem. But what about belief? They don't seem to be explainable in terms of the motions and the motions and noises, to paraphrase Kim. We have to resort to verbal behavior. Kim says, a person who believes that there are no native leopards in North America has a certain linguistic disposition. For example, he would tend to utter the sentence, there are no native leopards in North America, or its synonymous variants, under certain conditions. This leads to the following semantic or schematic definition. So S believes that P amounts to, if S is asked, is it true that P, S will answer, yes, it is true that P, or something synonymous with that. So let's break this down, right? So there are no native leopards in North America is the verbal behavior. And we can translate the mentalistic sentence, S believes that there are no leopards native to North America, to something like this, where S believes that P, such that if asked, is it true that P, is it true that there are no native leopards in North America, S will answer, yes, that's true. There are no native leopards in North America. This def here, this is just the definitions. That means definitions. Here it's just like providing the definition of S's belief that P in verbal behavior. So S has a disposition or a propensity to produce behavior of this type under certain conditions. Like if you asked him or her whether there are any native leopards in North America. So to have these beliefs and desires, you've got to be a language user, a skilled one at that. And we have to also assume that you want to tell the truth, right? And we assume that verbal behavior is also produced by lots of different mental states, not just beliefs, but desires, intentions, and so forth. So, so is everybody following that so far? Or I said I was going to ask different questions. I should ask who is not following so far. If there is any confusion or concerns, we can address that before moving forward. Okay, so far so good then. So when it comes to belief, like pain behavior, easily translated, we can take a psychological statement about pain and translate it into a sentence about pain behavior easily. Can we do that with verbal behavior, like mentalistic or psychological statements to verbal behavioral statements? It's going to get tricky. This is the desire, belief, action principle. If a person desires that P and believes that doing A is an optimal way to secure P, she will do A. So if our subject desires to answer the question truthfully and believes that uttering the sentence, yes, it is true that P is an optimal way to do that, then she'll do that. Or Mary's opening of the window. If Mary is warm, she desires to be less warm and believes that opening the window is an optimal way to be less warm by letting some cool air in through that window, she'll do that, right? How about some other examples of the belief, desire, action principle? Can you think of any of your own? Yeah. I mean, if you desire to have some cake for dessert and you believe that the bakery has cake and that you can reach the bakery with, without significant difficulty, then you will go to the bakery and get a cake. Yeah, attending class because you want to do well. You want to get an A+, and you believe that by attending class regularly and studying hard is an optimal way to get an A, then you will attend class regularly and study hard. So Halia, basically what we're dealing with here is a principle that says that if someone desires to bring about some state of affairs and believes that there is an optimal way of doing something to bring about that state of affairs, then as a rational agent, they will do that in order so that they can bring about the desired state of affairs. Yeah, brushing your teeth because you want clean teeth. Exactly. That's a great example. We do this all the time, right? Yes. I do that all the time because those children really can scream. Aldwin, yeah. If you that is a way to make an impression. Yeah. Okay, so these are all very good examples. Yeah, I like this. So good. So we understand the desire, belief, action principle. I mean, this is how a lot of behavior is produced. And this is how we understand a lot of the behavior of others. I mean, think of these sort of folk psychology or common sense psychology explanations that we come up with to explain the behavior of others. Like, your roommate was listening to the weather report, and when she left the house, she had her umbrella. So you can infer from that she believes it's going to rain, and she desires not to get rained on. Right? So this is called folk psychology or common sense psychology. Another important thing that we have to work our way through in our analysis here is the defeasibility of mental behavioral entailments. I know that's a mouthful, so let's explain it. If there is a plausible entailment of behavior B by mental states M1, etc., there is always a further mental state Mn plus 1, such that M1 through, however many mental states we've got, together plausibly entail not B. This is complicated, but the point that Kim is making is that mind to behavior connections are always defeasible by the occurrence of another state. Who is familiar with what this term defeasible means? Defeasibility. And also entailment. We should talk about entailment. Is anyone familiar with these? Does anyone want to volunteer some definitions for defeasibility or entailment? And you can Google this, by the way. Don't use Google on your quiz, but you can Google this. I'll wait, clean my glasses while you think of your answers. Okay, nothing yet. So maybe we're not too familiar with this terminology, and that's okay. Yeah, entailment. Entailment is a feature of deductive arguments or analytical truths, like being a bachelor entails that you are an unmarried man. Being a triangle entails having 3 sides. Yeah, and that's a good definition for defeasible is open for revision. So entailment, think of a deductive syllogism like, that classic one, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So that in that argument, the premises entail the conclusion. Yeah, that's another good one for defeasibility, Jill. Defeasible means it can be defeated. In epistemology, we talk about these things called defeaters, right? Like I can look out my window and I can see some trees. So my visual experience is such that I'm presented with what appear to be trees and I don't have any reason not to think that they are trees. I'm going to try and find something real quick. I'm going to try and find a tree defeater. Let's see if we can find a tree defeater. I saw this recently. I'm gonna try and find it. Okay, this is a great example of a defeater. So I could be looking at trees, and maybe one of these is thrown into the mix, right? This is actually a cell phone tower. Now it's meant to look like a tree, but it's a tree defeater. I could look at a group of trees with one of these and think there's a group of trees, but then someone could tell me, well, that's not actually a tree. That is, in fact, a cell phone tower that's made to look like a tree. So I would be mistaken. There was a defeater that means I would have to revise my belief. Like, oh, it's not just a bunch of trees. It's a bunch of trees and a cell phone tower that looks like a tree. So there's an example of a defeater when it comes to trees. This tree-like cell phone tower, right? So that's a defeater, and mind to behavior connections are always defeasible by the occurrence of another mental state. That's what this means. If we're going to say that there is an entailment of behavior B by mental state M1, M2, or M3, there's always going to be another mental state that can work as a defeater for that entailment. So I might be behaving one way, like I listen to my roommate listens to the radio, brings her umbrella with her, and I think she must believe that it's going to be raining. So that belief entails the behavior, taking your umbrella. But that's defeasible maybe it's not going to rain. Maybe it's going to be very, very sunny. And I mistakenly thought she brought the umbrella to block the rain, but actually the umbrella is going to serve the purpose of a parasol. It's going to provide shade from the sun. So mental state, the mental state my roommate has could be something like um, she believes it's going to be very, very sunny. There's going to be a high UV index, which means that there was not an entailment of that behavior from the mental state that it is raining. So mind to behavior connections are always defeasible in this way by the occurrence of another mental state. Kim considers a lot of different examples. Does anyone remember any of them? We can go over some of them if you want. Well, why don't we crack open our textbooks and take a look? Oh, Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, I think he talks about the example of opening the window, and then he provides kind of like the counter example of, well, maybe I think it was being loud outside actually.
Yeah,
So then you don't want to open the window, but then the grandmother is in the room and she needs the breeze, so maybe we'll put up with the noise outside. But
yeah.
it kind of goes on and on. I mean, you can think of so many reasons to and reasons not to.
Yeah, you can almost go on ad infinitum, and there's going to be any number of potential defeaters to the mind behavior entailment, right? Because people are complicated, and we misread one another's behaviors all the time, right? Um, like I'm trying to think of an example. The last time somebody mistook a behavior for something else that happened to me, I can't remember what it was. Well, I was walking down the street the other day and I was looking across the street, but there was a guy on a scooter coming the opposite way. And not a scooter, but like one of those like a mobility scooter, not one of those scooters that you rent, right? And I was looking across the street and but I guess maybe he thought I was staring at him. And as he goes by, he's muttering like muttering something at me. And I thought like, oh, maybe he thought I was staring at him, but in fact I was not. I was behaving in a different way for different reasons than perhaps he thought, right? So we misread behavior all the time, right? Um, Keep this in mind. I've quoted from Kim 7576. Considerations like these, the counterexamples that he offers, make it seem exceedingly unlikely that anyone could ever produce correct behavioral definitions of mental terms linking every mental expression with an equivalent behavioral expression referring solely to pure physical behavior, the motions and noises. To have even a glimmer of success, we would need, it seems, to work at the level of intentional action, not of physical behavior. That is, at the level of actions like greeting a friend, buying and selling, and reading the morning paper, not behavior at the level of motions and noises. So, yeah, what do we think? I mean, some mental phenomena do seem tied to natural expressions like the motion and noises, like when you scream ouch when you hurt yourself. But when it comes to intentional behavior, it's a lot more complicated because people might behave in certain ways for a variety of reasons. So the reason why you can't translate those mentalistic descriptions into behavioral descriptions is because there could be any number of reasons, mental reasons, why people do what they do and say what they say. This bottom bit is just about what entailment means, which I did mention, but I'll read this just so that we're all clear. Entailment, when we say that pain entails winces and groans, we're saying anyone in pain winces and groans is analytically or conceptually true. That is like bachelors are unmarried and vixens are females. It is true solely in virtue of the meanings of the terms involved. This is something that a behaviorist might try to defend. They might try to defend the mental behavioral entailment by saying that there's no possible world in which a being winces and moans and yet is not in pain. But does that make sense? Well, probably not, right? What about super Spartans and super Stoics? Here's a super Spartan right here. That's King Leonidas from that silly movie 300. We could have a super Spartan like him who doesn't show pain even when he's in pain, or a super Stoic, you know, someone who's also likewise very reserved and does not react strongly to things, who suspends their judgment about things. These people may seem to never exhibit pain behavior, even if they were in pain, but we can't state that these people have a disposition. We could state that they have a disposition or maybe a propensity to behave in a painy sort of way when the right conditions obtain, right? Maybe the super Spartan does feel pain and doesn't express that pain, but we could still say that he has a disposition to behave in the right kind of way if he is experiencing pain. Or the octopus. You know, non-human animals like the octopus are very different. You know, an octopus is not going to wince and groan and say ouch in pain. So does the pain entailment thesis make it impossible that an octopus could not be in pain? It seems so, but that's absurd. Because clearly non-human animals do experience pain. You know, if I accidentally step on my cat's tail, it'll go, meow. It won't say ouch, it'll meow. If I step on my dog's tail, it will yelp and then look at me and like as if to say, why did you do this to me? Of course, it's always accidental, but no specific behavior is actually entailed by pain. So we cannot say, like we did a few slides ago, that anyone in pain winces and groans is analytically or conceptually true the way a philosophical behaviorist would want to, because that would rule out non-human animals or aliens or anything really experiencing pain, which would be absurd. And that leaves us with what Kim calls the weak behavior entailment thesis. For any pain-capable species, there is a certain behavior, type B, such that for that species, being in pain entails a propensity to emit behavior of type B. But this would seem to make defining pain in terms of behavior impossible, because there are any number of different potential pain behaviors. For a human, it might be going ouch and withdrawing your whatever part of your body from the painful stimulus. For an octopus, it might be withdrawing your tentacles, but also shooting some ink out and jetting away with your weird octopus water jet things that you have, right? For a cat, it might be going wow and then running under the bed and hiding for a few hours. So we can't define pain in terms of behavior because there's just such a variety of different behaviors that there could be. There could be aliens with radically different physiology than humans somewhere out there in the universe. And maybe when they're in pain, they do something completely different. Maybe when they're in pain, they go blah and they glow green. I don't know, right? So we can't define pain in terms of behavior because there's so many different kinds of pain behavior. Now, we've been dealing with logical behaviorism, which of course deals with what we can say meaningfully about mentality and behavior. And the idea is that any psychological description or mentalistic description can be reduced to a behavioral description without loss of content. Yeah, there could be, there's a paper out there, I forget the author, but it's called Mad Pain and Martian Pain. You know, some people, heck, some people who aren't mad like pain. Okay. You ever get a runner's high or go to the gym and you get the pump, right? When after you've run, you're sore. After you've lifted, you're sore. But your body releases endorphins so that you don't feel, you know, you're still sore, but you also feel like, oh yeah, like that was good, right? So if you get a runner's high or you go and get your pump on, yeah, you're going to be sore, but it's like a satisfying kind of soreness. Um, Consider also, and I hope this isn't too risque of an example, but consider BDSM. Okay, these folks in certain controlled circumstances like being in pain or inflicting pain, right? So they might be happy, you know, maybe they get you know, some people like I guess a sort of geez, I'm this is getting weird, but you know, a spank on the bottom. Um and they might like that sort of thing, right? So uh you know, and these people aren't mad. They're not crazy, right? So yeah, you know, go to the gym, or BDSM, you know, any of these examples. Are there other examples of people reacting positively to pain that we can think of? Those are the only two that come to my mind, but um oh, tattoos. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I don't have any tattoos, so I don't know. But maybe someone who does can talk about, maybe you can share your experience, you know, because I like to go jogging every once in a while and I get a runner's high. That's about it for me. But tattoos, what about tattoos? Oh, okay. Maybe someone who's gotten a tattoo can speak to this. I know that they can hurt depending on where they are. They can hurt more or less. Venance, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a tattoo on my index finger, and
Mm.
it hurts a lot on the finger, but it was just something I wanted to do.
And when you were getting it done, would you say you were like, were you happy about getting the tattoo, but not happy about the pain? Or like how does that work?
In that moment of getting it done, wasn't happy about getting the tattoo. It was more just processing the pain.
Right. Yeah.
I think it was the wrong decision, wrong place.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
And I guess once you start, you don't want to stop halfway through, right?
exactly. Just
Yeah.
had to finish.
Because then you have half of a tattoo. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's pain behavior. Now, okay, so like I was saying, logical behaviorism deals with what we can say meaningfully about mentality and behavior. Ontological behaviorism is a stronger claim. It makes claims about well, there's a mistake there. Makes claims about um just what is pain behavior and what is not, or what is any type of behavior and what is not. Ontology, by the way, is the study of being or beings, and some folks think of it as a sub branch of metaphysics. So the study of reality. So whenever we say, you know, when we're talking about logical behaviorism, we're talking about what we can say. When we're talking about ontological behaviorism, we're talking about claims about the kinds of creatures that experience pain and the ways that they behave. A radical behaviorist would be something like an eliminativist. They would deny that there are any interstates, or perhaps less strongly, they would deny that interstates play an important role in pain behavior. And maybe we can make sense of this by considering the difference between these two claims. You know, a radical behaviorist might claim, one, pain just is winces and groans. But pain might also just be the cause of winces and groans. That would imply that there is an inner state that causes the behavior. They wouldn't say that it's like the behavior is constitutive of being in pain. So one is ontological behaviorism, right? Pain just is winces and groans. That's a claim about reality. Pain as the cause of winces and groans is something that a logical behaviorist would be comfortable to endorse. Now, logical behaviorism doesn't entail ontological behaviorism. This is something discussed by Kim on 79 and 80. Why not? Why doesn't it entail ontological behaviorism? What do we think? And again, feel free to crack open your textbooks and take a look. But why would logical behaviorism not entail ontological behaviorism? Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can imagine cases where certain things are causes of another thing but aren't identical to that thing, right? I mean, I don't know. I can't think of like a great example, but I think that just seems pretty self-evident to me.
Yeah, well, like logical behaviorism, remember, it's about what we can meaningfully say. And we can, the ways we talk about reality meaningfully don't affect the way that reality actually is. Right? Yeah. Like Jack says here, semantics doesn't necessarily correlate to being. Yeah, so what we can say about reality doesn't determine the way that reality is. Does ontological behaviorism entail logical behaviorism? The answer, Kim says, is probably no. Let's go to the textbook because I want to make sure that I get this absolutely right. So we'll hop over to page 78. Let's get this out of the way here. So we read here, claim 1 expresses an ontological behaviorism about pain. There's nothing more to pain than pain behavior. But 2 is not. 2 is logical behaviorism. Okay. Oh, here we go. Does ontological behaviorism entail logical behaviorism? Again, the answer has to be no. From the fact that x's are y's, nothing interesting follows about the meanings of the expressions x and y. In particular, nothing follows about their interdefinability. So the examples here, lightning is electrical discharges in the atmosphere. Genes are DNA molecules, but the expressions lightning and electrical discharge in the atmosphere aren't conceptually related or synonymous. Well, I don't know. Not conceptually related. I don't know if I agree with that. I might disagree with Kim here. Seems to me that they are conceptually related. But then again, I don't know. What do you think? Well, I guess they don't necessarily have to be conceptually related. Like, there are people that thought that lightning was not electrical discharge in the atmosphere. They thought it was Zeus's thunderbolt or Thor's hammer or something, right? I guess that's the sense in which Kim means that they aren't necessarily conceptually related, and that is why pain as winces and groans doesn't entail logical behaviorism, because logical behaviorism is all about what we can say meaningfully. I guess it's a two sides of the same coin thing where we're dealing with semantics on the one hand and reality on the other. And by semantics, I mean meaning. Okay, how are we doing so far? Because I know that this is heavy stuff. We're doing a lot of epistemology, a lot of metaphysics. It's very abstract. How are we doing so far? Like, if you're hopelessly lost, don't be afraid to tell me what's troubling you. and we'll spend some extra time on it. I just want to say, like, you know, if you're in my class, you know, there's nothing wrong with being a little lost or confused. I myself am confused much of the time, you know, like Socrates, right? Socrates went around being all confused all over the place. He loved it. Okay, so Halia, which terms are you looking for there? Is it semantics and reality? Like which terms exactly? If you give me the terms, I will give you a concise. Okay, so ontological is being or beings, the kinds of things that exist and what they're like. But logical in this context is about what we can meaningfully say about behavior. It's the ontological behaviorists are saying that pain just is, you know, winces, groans, grabbing your wherever you're injured and going, ow. That's all there is to being in pain. That's what the ontological behaviorists say. But a logical behaviorist would say any statement, any psychological or mentalistic statement like I'm in pain or Josh is in pain can be translated into a behavioral statement like Josh grabs his hand and winces and groans without losing any content or any information. So the behavioral statement, if you're a logical behaviorist, means the same thing as the mentalistic statement, and you're just sort of reducing the mental to the behavioral. Does that make sense? Okay, very good, very good. No problem. Yeah, and stop me anytime. Like I know there's a lot of when you start taking a philosophy class, you have to learn a lot of terminology quite quickly. So, you know, if I'm rattling off all these terms and you kind of need a reminder or a refresher every once in a while, just let me know and we'll stop and make sure that we all know what we're talking about. So where are we at now? Well, Kim writes that if a person observes someone writhing on the floor, clutching his broken leg, and screaming for help, and yet refuses to acknowledge that he is in pain, wouldn't it be correct to say that this person does not have the concept of pain, that he does not know what pain means? If Wittgenstein's beetle in the box shows anything, it is the point that publicly accessible behaviors are essential to anchor the meanings of our mental terms like pain and to explain the possibility of knowledge of what goes on in other people's minds. We play the same language game, right? How do I know about the beetle in your box? Well, our publicly accessible behaviors, at least when it comes to mentalistic terms, are what anchor the meanings of those terms. We play the same language game with one another. Now we're going to talk about a little Kripke. Sorry, by the way, sorry. Kripke is quite tricky. Consider this. And this, by the way, is drawn ultimately from Wittgenstein, this whole 1 meter long thing. Kripke develops it, but it goes back to the philosophical investigation. So how long is 1 meter? Well, in Paris, they have the standard meter. Kripke, right here, Kripke, like this. See, Saul Kripke. Right there. Saul Kripke was a philosopher of mind and language working in the 20th century, and he made a lot of developments in what we call modal logic, as well as the philosophy of language. His interpretation of Wittgenstein is known as Kripkenstein. Are these statements true? Which statements? Aldwin, which statements do you mean? Well, I'll wait. I'll wait for that. But more about Kripke. Kripke. So Kripke was a very interesting figure. Um, He wrote some papers on logic, which made a huge splash in philosophy. So much so that I believe it was Harvard University wrote to Saul Kripke and said, you know, dear Professor Kripke, we've read your papers on modal logic, and we'd love for you to come and teach a seminar at Harvard on logic. Kripke writes back, I'd love to teach at Harvard, but my mom thinks I should finish high school first. Yeah, this guy was a prodigy, but also a very odd person. He This is a guy that could write a paper on logic but couldn't take care of his laundry. This is a guy who um he would go around with a ladder and like climb the ladder and look into undergraduate girls' rooms, kind of creeping on them. And a lot of this, you know, is only a lot of it was an open secret for years, but so Kripke was quite brilliant in some ways, but quite almost disabled in other ways. It's hard to retroactively diagnose people, but it seems like he was probably on the autism spectrum. But anyway, that's Kripke for you. Very smart, but also highly problematic in certain ways. So, how long is 1 meter? Well, in Paris, we have the standard meter. It's like a piece of metal that's 1 meter long, and we measure the meter against that meter. So that's how long is the standard meter? The standard meter is 1 meter long. Now, here's what Kripke asked. He asked if this was necessarily true. Yeah, well, genius, I mean, genius is an interesting idea. I mean, some people would say that philosophers are not the kind of people that can be geniuses, right? It really depends what you mean by genius. Immanuel Kant, for example, reserved the term genius specifically for artists. Only artists are geniuses, not philosophers, not scientists. Why? Because philosophers and scientists can explain what they're doing and how they figured out what they figured out, whereas a genius is like inspired, and it's like the muses have inspired them, right? Yeah, Schopenhauer believed that anyone could be a genius, but Kant believed that only artists could be genius, and moreover that you just kind of have it. It's a natural talent. And geniuses are those artists that a genius is, in Kant's words, how nature gives the rule to art. So like the artists of the Renaissance are geniuses because they introduced three-dimensional perspective and realism into art. And after that, everybody started doing art that way. So, you know, Da Vinci, Raphael, Michelangelo, Donatello, they're geniuses. But Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, they are not geniuses, Kant would say, because they can tell you how they do what they do. Artists can't, right? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think so. But everybody certainly has unique talents. But I also see the thing about Kripke is that regardless of, you know, whether he's a genius in the Kantian sense or not, people kind of tend to let quote unquote geniuses be away with get away with behaving badly. You know, if you see a show like The Big Bang Theory, you see this, right? Like, the guys on The Big Bang Theory are all very smart people, and most of them behave in ways that are completely inappropriate and unacceptable. But it's like they get away with it because they're smart. And I think that is something that we ought not to encourage. That's my take on it, right? So like Sheldon Cooper is often a jerk to everyone around him, right? But it's like, oh, he can't help it. He's a genius. Well, no, man, you can help it. You know, and Kripke's not the only one. Wittgenstein was also like this. You know, Wittgenstein was a great philosopher, but somebody that I probably would not have wanted to know personally, right? He probably would have been an asshole. Um, like there's all these stories, of these very smart people being very bad with other people. I don't think high intelligence is an excuse for that. Yeah, Jack, you're right. There's even a book called Philosophers Behaving Badly, which I highly encourage everyone to read at some point if you decide to stick with studying philosophy. And it covers a number of people like Bertrand Russell, who was a bit of a philanderer, Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, who were definitely grooming graduate students. Wittgenstein, I don't remember if he's in the book, but he once hit a child so hard that he went unconscious. This was when he was working briefly as a school teacher. And Martin Heidegger, who was a Nazi, right? Yeah. I'll write it in the chat here. Oh, I've misspelled it, but Philosophers Behaving Badly. It's a good book. Everyone should read it. If you're interested in the life and times of some of the most important philosophers. Okay, let's get back to the standard meter. Sorry, I know I went quite out of the way here. But we are talking about behaviors, so it's okay to talk about philosophers behaving badly. So the standard meter is 1 meter long. So we have the standard meter in Paris. It defines what a meter is. And so we can utter a statement like the standard meter is 1 meter long. Obviously, that's a true statement, but is it necessarily true? Not necessarily. I mean, necessarily like conceptually or analytically. No, it is not, Kripke would say. We could have chosen something else to be the standard meter. It might not have been 1 meter long. It's not necessarily true, therefore, that the standard meter is 1 meter long. It's contingently true. It's kind of like if I said red, if I defined by red by pointing to a red tomato, the tomato happens to be red now because it's ripe, but a few days ago the tomato was green. So the tomato is not necessarily red, it's contingently red. And we can use contingent facts to fix our concepts. This is what we do when it comes to pain behavior and other kinds of behavior. It doesn't have to be necessarily true that anybody going ouch and wincing and groaning and grabbing an injured part of their body is in pain. It's just contingently true that humans in pain tend to behave in those kinds of ways, right? An octopus might do something different. A cat or a dog would do something different. An alien from the planet Schlorp might do something different, right? That is why going ouch and wincing and groaning doesn't mean it's necessarily true that I'm in pain. Oh yeah, I saw this well, I don't watch soccer, but I watched that show Ted Lasso. And I think there's yeah, they do that, don't they, when they're out on the pitch and they pretend to be hurt and the audience is like, ooh, but then they get back in the game and it's like, wow, like, yeah. Oh, so the other team gets a yellow card. Okay. Like is that like a penalty? I don't know about sports, okay? So like, sorry, I don't know sports. So is that what that is? Like a penalty or how does that work? I watched Ted Lasso for the feels, obviously, not for the football. Yeah, is that what a yellow card is? I don't know. Well, someone will tell me, I'm sure. But yeah, that's another good point. Like just in general, you know, you could exhibit pain behavior and not be, oh, okay. I see. Yes, you're right, Jill. It's just that these are contingent truths, not necessary truths. That's the point. It is true that winces and groans are pain behavior, but it could be otherwise. Oh, okay. Oh, a yellow card is a first strike. Okay. Oh, well, now I know something about football. A couple times I've actually gone and seen a Canadian football game, and I don't really know what's happening, but it's fun. You know, the crowd cheers and you can have a couple of drinks and a hot dog or something and watch things. I don't really follow what's going on, but it's just kind of nice to be there. So, but then again, Canadian football is different than what the rest of the world calls football, right? So, okay, so Kim writes here on page 81. In a world in which different laws hold, or worlds in which the central nervous system of humans and those of other organisms are hooked up differently to peripheral sensory surfaces and motor output surfaces, the patterns of causal relations involving pain may be very different. But as things stand in this world, pain is the cause of winces and groans and certain other behaviors in humans and related animal species. So there's no logical entailment here, which is what the logical behaviorists wanted. They wanted the logical entailment between, feeling pain and there being pain behavior. But it's not, there can't be a logical entailment because it's not necessarily true that pain is winces and groans. Pain could be something else. Pain could be not a wince and groan in a human, but a yelp from a dog or a meow from a cat whose tail stepped on. Or if it's an octopus, it could be getting ink shot at you and a rapid withdrawal from the area. If it's an alien, it could be jiggling and glowing green, for goodness sake, right? Yes, exactly. Logical here, well, it's not that it can't be logical, it's that there's no logical entailment. It means that winces and groans equals pain is not a conceptual truth, the way unmarried man equals bachelor is a conceptual truth. We do, Michael. So identity theorists, for example, would say, well, pain is just C fibers firing. It's just certain activity in your nervous system, along with the behavior. But you could be a super Spartan, remember, and maybe your C fibers are firing, but you're not wincing and groaning because you're a super Spartan and you have to look really tough. Of course, there are problems even with reducing pain to physiological states like that, because just as other animals have different behavior, different pain behavior, they also have different nervous systems than we do. So that's why functionalism kind of comes on the scene. But we'll get to all of this. So there's no logical entailment. So that's it for philosophical behaviorism. Do we have any questions? Because we've got 30 or so minutes left to talk about behaviorism in psychology. So any questions, any further questions about logical behaviorism? The cognitive revolution happened in the 1960s, and that was the turn away from behaviorism and the renewed acceptance of talk about mental states. And it's called the cognitive revolution because we kind of went away from behavior and back toward cognition. That is thinking as information processing that happens within the mind. So that's why we call it the cognitive revolution. And it kind of it got started, like I was saying, there were multiple things that kicked it off, right? There was Edward Tolman's rat studies. There was Chomsky's review of B.F. Skinner's book, Alan Turing's work on the Turing machine, and then Hilary Putnam's development of that into functionalism was kind of like the philosophical side. There was the mental imagery studies, information theory, like Claude Shannon and all that. I could go on and on about this, and it's kind of outside the scope of the course, but there's a lot there. Well, I'll tell you what you want to do is check out Jose Luis Bermudez's book on cognition, cognitive science. So I'll type his name here. I think I've spelled it correctly. Check out his cognitive science textbook, and the first couple of chapters are basically all about the cognitive revolution. Or if you have a chance, you can take I don't think it's called Intro to Cognitive Science anymore. It's called like Issues in Cognitive Science. But it's a cognitive science survey course offered at Carleton, and it covers all of this very well. I used to teach it back in the day. So, well, Mysteries of the Mind is one of them, but this is actually a different course. It's CGSC 2001 is the course I'm thinking of. And it covers all of that. In fact, I'm pretty sure they still use Bermudez's textbook for that. So, okay. Yeah, maybe it's theories and cognitive. Maybe that's okay. That's what it's called now. Yeah. Yeah, it's changed. When I taught it, it was just intro to cog sci, but I think they've changed it around. But basically it's the same course. But yeah, you could take that course or you could check out Bermudez's textbook. So let's get on to behaviorism and psychology. You can think of this like normatively if you want. Norms are like rules or guidelines. When we're dealing with something normative, we're dealing with how something ought to be rather than how it is. So if we're thinking of behaviorism in psychology as normative, then what that is saying is that psychology should be concerned with behavior and not mental states. Another way to understand psychological behaviorism is B.F. Skinner's radical behaviorism, which tried to construct psychological theories that are grounded in something called conditioning. According to radical behaviorism, all learning is the result of conditioning, and conditioning is about association and reinforcement. Skinner was concerned with what we call classical conditioning as well as operant conditioning. So on classical conditioning, you try and associate a new stimulus with a sort of natural behavior, like Pavlov's dogs. Ivan Pavlov was a Russian behaviorist psychologist, and you probably all heard of Pavlov's dogs. Does anyone want to share the story of Pavlov's dogs, actually? I can do it, but I want to know if any of you know the story. Okay, so Halia knows it. That's good. Who else? Who else wants to tell me all about Pavlov's dogs? Okay, so maybe heard of it, but not quite sure on the detail. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a natural behavior that dogs do, right? And if you have a dog, you know, like they salivate in the presence of food because they get hungry. You know, they're like, oh, food, I eat food, you know? Well, it was actually a lot it wasn't intentional at first. It just happened that there was a bell on the door into the lab where the dogs lived, into the dog's kennel. And Pavlov would go in and feed the dogs, and the bell would ring when he went in and out of the room, and the dogs would salivate. And one time he goes in there without food, the bell rings, and the dogs start salivating. And he realized that they had associated the bell with the presence of food. So that's classical conditioning. When you associate a conditioned stimulus, the bell, with the same behavior you get with an unconditioned stimulus, that is drooling in the presence of food. And then there's also operant conditioning. That would the Aldwin, that's an example of operant conditioning. Bees detecting bombs, or yeah, I didn't know bees could detect bombs, but if we train them to detect bombs, We're training them to do something that they don't naturally do. And that's operant conditioning. This is also the kind of thing, you know, rats being trained to run a maze or pulling levers and pushing buttons to get a reward. That's operant conditioning. So that's training them to do something that's like not a natural behavior toward an unconditioned stimulus. So Skinner wants to explain all learning as the product of conditioning, association, and reinforcement. Associate the behavior with a certain stimulus, and we reinforce that behavior. The operant versus classical conditioning. So classical conditioning is like Pavlov's dogs. Operant conditioning is like a pigeon in a Skinner box who learns to push the green button because it gets a reward and avoids pushing the red button because there's no reward. Because pigeons don't naturally push buttons out there in the world, right? So the normativity stuff is what ought to concern us here. We're not going to concern ourselves too much more with Skinner's claims about behavior. Although Skinner did enjoy quite a lucrative career in marketing after he retired from psychology, and I'm sure that you can understand why. But yeah, we don't want to spend too much time on that. So let's talk about the normativity claim. We'll call this methodological behaviorism, following Kim. And we could formulate a claim for methodological behaviorism like this. The only admissible evidence for the science of psychology is observable behavioral data. That is data concerning the observable physical behavior of organisms. Now, the behaviorist insists on this because their claim is that that's what psychology ought to be concerned with, not mental states. Why? Because the mind is a black box. And mental states are not intersubjectively verifiable. Only remember, to be intersubjectively verifiable, something has to be publicly observable, and mental states are not. And that's what the Cartesian theater and the beetle in the box were supposed to show us, right? Mental states are private, but behavior is publicly accessible, right? There's a stronger claim that we can formulate, though. Psychological theories must not invoke the internal states of psychological subjects. That is, psychological explanations must not appeal to the internal states of organisms, nor should references to such states occur in deriving predictions about behavior. Wow, that's a really strong claim. How would we even do this? Well, remember, Skinner thinks that all learning is the product of conditioning, association, and reinforcement. And different behaviors, he thought, could be explained by just different histories of association and reinforcement. This is exemplified by Watson's experiment with little Albert. Does anyone know about little Albert? It's pretty dark what happened to little Albert. Yeah. So little Albert is an infant, and Skinner trains him to be afraid of cute things like stuffed animals and bunnies. I imagine Albert probably needed a lot of therapy once he grew up. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, eh? Imagine doing this to a child and not following up. Like, how you doing, Albert, 30 years later? Oh, I can't leave the house because every time I see a cute animal, I have a panic attack. Like, God. We don't do this anymore, okay? Nowadays, you could never do an experiment like this. But Watson and Skinner claimed, yeah, it's super, super unethical. Well, no, this wasn't Skinner. This was Watson. But it was claimed that we could make society better just by conditioning our kids. So, like, okay, we can make this kid a scientist and this one a doctor and this one a teacher just by conditioning them the right way. Yeah. Yeah, it's very depressing. So we don't do this anymore. But this is how we train our animals, though. If you notice that, like who has a dog? I have a dog. Anyone else have a dog or spend time around dogs? Or maybe you maybe you work with other kinds of animals. So Jill has a dog. Nurmith had one. Oh, new puppy. Lots of conditioning coming your way, Jack. Cats are some people say they're not trainable. I think they can. There's certainly some training you can do with them. And also the important thing about cats is they also train us, right? Cats are very good at getting what they want out of people. Like my cats, they know exactly how to get me to feed them. They just have to sit there and stare at me long enough. Yeah. So that's conditioning too, right? Like that's classical and operant conditioning. Oh yeah, well maybe one of them's around here. I think they're probably hiding. They're two brothers. What's that? Okay, so one of them, Yo-Yo, is downstairs at the moment. Maybe he'll come up here. Yo-Yo, would you like to meet my class? What? Oh, never mind. Wrong cat. It's Oki is downstairs. They're brothers. Yeah. They're weird little guys that my partner rescued. I don't know if they're twins, but they're definitely brothers. And they came from the same, they're litter mates, we'll see. Oki. Oh, what a fuzzball. So yeah, my partner used to ride horses, and she was coming back from the barn one day and found a mother cat with 5 kittens and brought them home, and we rehomed all of them, and Oki and Yo-Yo are ours. Yeah, Watson would not have liked Freud. He would have said, well, a lot of psychologists still consider Freud unscientific. And and in an important way, psychoanalysis is not scientific. But another thing that people forget about Freud is that he was right about the general picture of the mind. Like, he was wrong about it being all like Oedipus complex and castration anxiety and stuff like that. But he was right about unconscious things driving a lot of our behavior and a lot of our thinking. So Freud got a lot of details wrong, but I think he got the big picture right. Okay, come here, buddy. Come here, buddy. Okay, I will show you a cat. Oh. Here we go. Now, oh, okay. Well, he doesn't like to, I guess he doesn't like to come on the desk. Oh, here's Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo, come here, bud. Oh, here. Oh, look, they both, okay. Here, problem solved. Let's see. Can you see them? Come here, guys. Oh, yes. My handsome fellas. Yeah. Come here, sir. Oh. So these are the boys, and they're both enormous. Yo-Yo, come here, buddy. Oh, yep. Yep. So those are the cats. And they are great. They are chunky boys. You're right. Love it. Actually, Oki had to go to the vet. Yeah, he does look like Garfield. Oki had to go to the vet once, because he had those crystals, right? So we had to take him to the emergency vet, and we got him all fixed up. But the vet says to us, well, he certainly is a big boy. And that's funny. It was funny to us because that's what we call them, because both of these cats are huge. They're both larger than my dog. So, they're not like Maine Coon sized, but they're big for domestic short hairs. So, oh my God, I'm getting so distracted with cats. How are we doing for time? Okay, we should be all right. So can we do what the behaviorists want us to do? Right? Like, look, if I go back, oh, I skipped a slide there. Yeah, so psychological theories must not invoke the internal states of psychological subjects. You know, Skinner thinks everything is explained, all learning is explained by conditioning. And we have different histories of conditioning, like little Albert has a different one than I do. But Kim then asks, if this works, isn't that because the differences in the histories of the two organisms led to differences in their present internal states? Isn't it plausible to suppose that these differences here and now are what is directly implicated in the production of different behaviors now? Right? Accepting what Skinner says would be accepting mnemic causation, what we call mnemic causation, and that doesn't really work. You know, think of two dogs. One of them is trained to sit when his human says sit, to fetch when he says fetch. He's trained to ask to go outside, right? And his brother, the other dog from the litter, is not trained at all. So he doesn't listen when his master calls him. He poops in the house, and he doesn't behave very well. Skinner would say it's just their different histories of conditioning. But isn't the reason their behavior is different because they have different inner states as a result of their individual histories? So if we accepted two, we'd have no room for talk of mental states. So what about 3? Psychological theories must make no reference to inner mental states in formulating psychological explanations. This doesn't really leave room for a lot of things we need to talk about, like attention, memory, mental representations, information. But then again, maybe it just rules out private or subjective inner states. So is attention such a state? Seems to be, right? Memory certainly is. We have no room for these now. But do we have to go this crazy with our behaviorism? Right? Like how would a behaviorist explain ADHD? That's a great question. They might say that it's not a neurological difference, but a product of your behavioral history, your history of conditioning. Indeed, I don't know about ADHD. I don't know if it was ever explained behaviorally like that, but autism was. At one point, there was a theory of autism called the refrigerator mother theory. And the idea was that autism was caused by a cold, aloof mother who only provided, food and drink, but who was emotionally cold, like a refrigerator. Cold, holds the food and the stuff you need to live, but you're not going to get a hug from your refrigerator. And I cannot emphasize enough, this is definitely not the cause of autism, okay? If anything, Connor probably got it the other way around. It's not that, cold, aloof parents cause their kids to have autism and be socially withdrawn. Rather, those parents probably have some autistic traits themselves, which is why they are perhaps a little more aloof than your neurotypical parents, right? That's a behaviorist explanation of autism. And we know that it's wrong. In fact, when it comes to autism and ADHD, it has nothing to do with your behavioral history, although behavioral interventions can help. No, these are neurological differences that have to do with genetics, right? Now, why do we want to go so hard here, right? Like, why do behaviorists want to go so hard with behaviorism? Yeah, well, they wouldn't have really known about masking, like, and I've got to be honest, Skinner was working at a time before autism was identified. At this time, the word autism would have referred to what we today call catatonia. It would have been a completely different thing. And it was Leo Connor in the 50s who employed it to children who had intense interests and difficulty socializing, and sometimes difficulty with language, right? Um, and that was what was going on in the United States. At the same time in Germany, Hans Asperger was working with similar kids. Um, but now, of course, classic autism and Asperger syndrome have been merged into ASD, right? And they wouldn't have known anything about masking. A lot of these kids just would have been treated as insane, unfortunately, and just put away, right? So yeah, not a good time to be neurodivergent. Now is a great time, but back then, not a good time. So, okay, but why do the behaviorists want to go so hard with this? Get rid of all their unobservable nonsense. Like mental states are unobservable, so we can't do science with them. But come on, what about the other sciences? What about physics? Physics is the most sciency science that there is. And they posit unobservable things all the time, like quarks or strings, right? And their properties like spin and charge. You can have up quarks and down quarks and strange quarks. These are all theoretical because we don't directly observe them. We infer their existence from things that we can observe, right? Like nobody really sees electrons, but I can't explain how my fluorescent lights work without talking about electrons, right? So, if physics are okay with unobservable, if physicists are okay with unobservable theoretical concepts, psychologists ought to also be just fine with that. And finally, Kim says, in excluding private conscious states from psychological theory, number 3 excludes them from playing any causal explanatory role in relation to behavior. If it is true, as we ordinarily think, that some of our behavior is caused by inner mental states disallowed by 3, our psychological theory is likely to be incomplete. There may well be behavior for which no theory meeting 3 can provide full explanations. Bottom line, we need to talk about mental states or we cannot make sense of behavior. Right? So this chapter has been pretty negative toward behaviorism as a movement, both in psychology and in philosophy. Right? When it comes to, just by way of recap, when it comes to philosophy, that is logical behaviorism. Remember that for any mental statement that you're going to try to reduce to a behavioral statement, you want there to be the entailment of that behavior from that mental state. But there's always another possible mental state that could potentially work as a defeater. So there's no entailment. So the mentalistic sentences and the behavioral sentences can't mean the same thing. And when it comes to psychology, why disallow mental states when fundamentally, I mean, science uses unobservable theoretical entities all the time. There should be no problem with doing the same when it comes to the mental. So behaviorism, bad. But behavior is important for understanding mentality. And here are 4 reasons that Kim outlines for this. The brain is the ontological, or he says existential. I think that's probably a misnomer. But the brain is how the mind is realized. And the brain, and perhaps also the mind, is the cause of our behavior. Well, you wouldn't be a behaviorist. You'd be a cognitive psychologist. So you're still looking at behavior, but you're not ruling out the mental states that might explain the behavior or that might cause behavior. So cognitive psychology arose after the decline of behaviorism. And indeed, cognitive psychology is today one of the cognitive scientists, cognitive sciences, along with philosophy of mind, linguistics, AI, computer science, etc. So the cognitive revolution it's how cognitive science got going, but it's how psychology went from behaviorist psychology to cognitive psychology. I mean, keep in mind, there's many branches of psychology, right? We've only really been talking about one today, but there's tons of branches of psychology. So the brain is the basis of the mind, and the brain, and maybe also the mind, is the cause of our behavior. And behavior is the semantic foundation of mental language. It fixes the meanings of our mentalistic expressions or our psychological expressions. How do I know what it is to be in pain? Well, I have the same pain behavior as you, or similar enough. That's how I know the beetle in my box might be the same as your beetle in your box. We're playing the same language game. When I stub my toe and go, ouch, well, you've also stubbed your toe and gone, ouch. So we understand each other, what's happening, right? And behavior, finally, is the primary, almost exclusive evidence for the attribution of mental states to other beings with minds. Our knowledge of other minds depends primarily on an observation of behavior. You know, the behaviorists kind of went the wrong way with this, right? They were like, we can't observe mental states, so let's just stick to behavior. But the cognitive people say, whoa. Behavior is how we know about mental states. Behavior is how we know there are other minds out there. Behavior, including, physical behavior, but also verbal behavior, is how I know that you are a thinking, feeling being, and not just a robot or a philosophical zombie or something, right? So how do we deal with solipsism? Behavior. Physical behavior and verbal behavior. All right, we've made it to the end. Any questions? Okay, well, I can take questions, but in the meantime, I wanted to say that next week, do we have exams? There is an exam in this class. It is, yes, next week there is a quiz. Yeah, and next week's quiz, it'll go on Monday. Probably Monday. You do not have to do it on Monday because Monday's a holiday, but it will be live on Monday. So you can do it if you want, but you don't have to because it's a holiday. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the lecture. Yes, so we will have a quiz, and the quiz will cover mind as immaterial substance and mind as behavior. So it'll cover this chapter and the previous chapter. Same exact format as this one. 10 multiple choice true false questions and 2 short written answer questions. No, the quizzes aren't cumulative. The quizzes just cover the material that we cover for this week. So next week's quiz covers this week's material. This week's quiz covers last week's material. Also, my slides went away, but let me bring them back here. So next week, yes, there is one class only, and we're going to use that class to talk about writing an essay proposal and an essay. I know it's early, but I want to get this out of the way. And if you think about it, we're already 3 chapters in, right? We're already well on our way through this course. So it is already time to talk about your essays and essay proposals. So yes, that's all I can think of as far as the housekeeping stuff goes. Any questions? Are we sure? Well, yeah, the structure of the short answer questions, I've already said quite a bit about that. There's a breakdown of what you earn marks for in each question, and each answer should be maximum 2 paragraphs long. And they deal with some major thing from the lectures or the textbooks. So you don't, it indicates in each question what kind of information you need to give me in order to earn marks. So Holly, you said it's confusing. In what way? Because if I can make the next quiz less confusing, I will try.
Yeah, so there has been a couple of things I kind of noticed. So it kind of like keep mentioning to talk in a mentalistic language. And so I was like a bit confused, like what do you mean by that? Like I
So
know it's like in philosophy thing, but I'm not sure in actual answers.
Well, anytime I say mentalistic language, I'm talking about terms like beliefs, desires, emotions, perceptions, sensations, anything like that. So today, for example, we learned about the behaviorists who wanted to get rid of all of that, right? And they just wanted to talk about behavior. But anytime we talk about thinking, acting, feeling, consciousness, emotions, perception, that's mentalistic language or mental language.
So it is not like really like something I need to add on. It is just kind of like writing the way that we understand from the lecture in only
Yeah,
word.
like
Yeah.
yeah, like if I'm asking you a question about some kind of mentalistic language, that I just want, yeah, I mean, I can't really talk about the content of the quiz right now because the quiz is live, right? But like this is why I say before you begin, even though the quiz is open book, read your notes, read my slides, read the chapter a second time if you have to. It really is a good idea to study before beginning the quiz. Jack, I'm hoping that I'm trying to aim for a turnaround time of a week. Um, and it might be sooner. But that's kind of like what I'm shooting for. Okay, any other questions? Because class has officially ended. So we should wrap it up. All right. All right. Yeah. I mean, if you do think of a question about the material, you can always email me for clarification and I'll try and answer your questions. So thanks everybody for another good lecture. Remember, only one class next week, and we're going to talk about how to write an essay proposal and an essay, and maybe we'll brainstorm some potential topics too. Okay. So I'll see you all next week, and I hope you all have a really good long weekend. All right. Bye, everyone.